It begins with a picture, a funeral portrait taken in Middletown, Pennsylvania, 1902. At first glance, nothing seems unusual. Black, veiled mourners gathered around a polished coffin, the pale face of a young woman laid out in silence. Yet when magnified, one sees a face among the mourners that does not belong. A man, neither family nor friends, stands too close, his expression unreadable, his gaze fixed not on the coffin, but directly at the camera. The town would later whisper that this man was the murderer, but the true horror lay not in the crime itself, but in the ritual of silence that followed. Middletown was not unique, a river town swollen with industry, soot, and whispers of progress. Yet beneath its brick facades, secrets rotted. Death photography was common then. Families wanted to preserve faces before the earth consumed them. But photographs could also preserve what was never meant to be seen, a stranger at the edge of the frame, a smile too sharp for grief, eyes that refused to close. The image became an obsession for those who studied it, but the townspeople refused to speak. They acted as though the photograph did not exist, even as copies circulated quietly, tucked into drawers, hidden inside hymnals. Her name was Clara Hensley, just 23 years old. Officially, she died of consumption, the convenient explanation for half the deaths of the time. Yet Clara was healthy only weeks before, her skin bright, her laughter echoing down cobblestone streets. Something changed in her household. Neighbors reported arguments, faint cries, and a strange figure seen entering the Hensley home at night. When Clara's body appeared, it was marked not by disease but by bruises that did not fit. And yet, her family did not protest. They followed the church's instructions, to bury her quickly, to let the matter rest. The man in the photograph was never identified, yet everyone in town seemed to know him. He appeared at wakes, at weddings, at baptisms, always standing near the family, never introduced, never questioned. He seemed to belong nowhere, yet his presence was tolerated. Some whispered he was a relative from out of state, others claimed he was a church emissary. But children, with their unfiltered sight, described him differently, the man with teeth too white and eyes that never blinked. In Clara's funeral photograph, he stands closest to her coffin, as though claiming ownership over her death. The First Reformed Church held power over Middletown's grieving. Its ministers dictated how bodies were buried, how deaths were recorded, even which tragedies were to be spoken of, and which were to be forgotten. In Clara's case, the pastor refused to allow a full autopsy. Instead, he declared from the pulpit that death had visited swiftly and mercifully. His voice carried the authority of God, and no one dared challenge him. Yet behind the closed doors of the vestry, whispers swirled. The photograph had unsettled even the clergy, but their fear was not of the man. It was of what exposing him would unravel. Middletown housed an orphanage run by the same church. Children placed there spoke of nighttime visitors, men in dark coats who came not to nurture but to select. One girl, years later, claimed she saw Clara herself inside the orphanage weeks before her death, dressed in plain clothes, carrying a bundle of food. Clara, it seemed, was helping someone, or something, she should not have. Days after that sighting, she vanished from town records, reappearing only as a corpse. Was her death punishment for knowing too much? The photograph suggested she had not died alone. Historians who later attempted to study Clara's case ran into an impossible barrier. Records missing, ledgers altered, names crossed out. Births and deaths from the spring of 1902 had been erased. The church archivist, when pressed, said only those pages were damaged by damp. Yet the ink trails told another story. Deliberate removal, whole sections ripped clean. Why would a congregation devoted to memory and faith destroy its own history unless memory itself had become dangerous? Unless silence was survival. The man who took Clara's funeral portrait was Edwin Pike, a local photographer known for his meticulous staging. Weeks after delivering the prints, he vanished. His studio, when opened, was found in disarray, chemicals spilled, plates shattered, negatives burned. Only one glass plate remained intact, Clara's funeral photograph. On its surface, beyond the stranger's face, shadows seemed to ripple unnaturally, as though the image itself resisted erasure. Pike was never seen again. Some said he fled. Others whispered the man in the photo came for him. Years later, surviving orphans told fragments of a story. They remembered Clara's visits, her attempts to comfort them, her insistence that she would bring the truth to light. They also remembered the stranger, who appeared in the halls unannounced, staring at the sleeping children. One boy claimed the man whispered him backward. Another swore he saw him remove a child through a locked door. These testimonies were dismissed as the fancies of the traumatized, yet every account described the same face, the same as in the photograph. When Clara was buried, rumors spread that her coffin was disturbed. Gravediggers found soil displaced, boards cracked, as though someone, or something, had tried to rise. The church quickly dismissed it as vandalism, sealing the site with stone. But locals avoided that corner of the cemetery thereafter. Some swore they saw figures standing near the grave at night. Others claimed the grass around her plot never grew again, remaining bare earth even decades later. Middletown lived on silence, but silence is porous. In taverns and kitchens, people whispered their suspicions. They spoke of the church protecting predators, of orphans disappearing, of families silenced by fear. Yet whenever someone grew bold enough to confront the clergy, tragedy struck. A fire in a barn, a child's sudden illness, a father found drowned in shallow water. Middletown learned to stop asking questions. The photograph remained locked away, shown only in hushed warnings to the curious. Some accounts suggest the stranger was no local at all, but a traveling minister, one of many who drifted between towns at the turn of the century, conducting revivals and funerals. These men often arrived with no records, no past, and departed just as suddenly. They preached fervor, demanded donations, and vanished when suspicion grew. But this man lingered. He embedded himself in the rituals of death, standing always at the threshold between grief and faith. He did not bring God, he brought erasure. In 1921, a letter surfaced from a former orphan named Eleanor Briggs. She described in detail how Clara had discovered the secret rooms beneath the orphanage, where the children went and did not return. Eleanor claimed Clara tried to expose this but was silenced. The letter ends abruptly. He was in the room when she screamed. He looked at me next, his face. It is in the photograph. Eleanor mailed this letter from another state. Days later, her boarding house burned to the ground. She was never found. Investigators decades later uncovered remnants beneath the church, bricked-over chambers, narrow tunnels leading nowhere, and stains on the stone that could not be explained by age alone. These discoveries were quickly sealed, declared unsafe for entry. Official tours of the church never mentioned them, but those who forced their way inside spoke of walls scratched with fingernails, initials carved by desperate hands, and symbols resembling inverted crosses. By the 1930s, the Hensley family had all but disappeared. Survivors changed their names, moved states, never spoke of Clara again. Yet descendants who stumbled on the photograph decades later described nightmares, illnesses, and sudden paranoia. Some swore they saw the man's face appear in crowds, unchanged by time. The silence that protected Middletown had become a curse, woven into bloodlines, passed down like a disease. The funeral photograph resurfaced in the 1950s when a collector of postmortem photography purchased it from an estate sale. He displayed it briefly in Philadelphia, but withdrew it when viewers complained of nausea, headaches, and sudden fainting. Some swore the man in the photograph shifted positions between viewings. Others claimed his eyes followed them across the room. The collector locked it away, warning colleagues that some images are not meant to be preserved. Skeptics argue the entire story is a case of mass hysteria. The stranger in the photo, perhaps a cousin, forgotten in oral history, the missing records, careless preservation, the orphan testimonies, symptoms of trauma reframed as supernatural. Yet even psychologists who studied the case admitted an unease. The photograph seemed to radiate dread, an unexplainable heaviness that lingered after viewing. One doctor confessed privately, "It is not the girl who frightens me. It is the man who looks at us, as if he knows we are watching." Clara's grave remains unmarked, part of a weeded corner of Middletown Cemetery. Locals rarely approach it. Some say electronic devices fail near the site, watches stop, photographs blur. Teenagers who trespass report hearing hymns in the air, low voices speaking names they do not know. The grave is avoided not because of superstition, but because the town still remembers what it cannot say aloud. No one knows where the photograph rests today. Some claim it was destroyed in a fire, others that it remains in a private collection, locked in a vault. A rumor persists that the church itself keeps it hidden deep in its archives, a reminder of its own power and of what happens when one attempts to break the silence. If it survives, it is a relic of a horror buried but never absolved. The story of Clara Hensley is not just about a murder. It is about a system that devours truth, that turns grief into control, that transforms silence into ritual. The photograph is more than evidence. It is a mirror reflecting the face of a stranger who stands at the edges of all our histories, smiling, unblinking, patient. He is always there, waiting to be noticed. And once you see him, you cannot unsee him. Perhaps even now he has found his way into your memory, and perhaps he is standing behind you,